My wife and I, both are 35-year-old, and have been married for 15 years, and we've been together for 20 years. We have 2 kids, 12 and 14, whom we absolutely adore and work tirelessly to provide the best possible life for them. For the past 3 years, things have been somewhat bumpy. I understand that our kids are at an age where they require a ton of our attention and resources with school, band, club sports, and other extracurriculars, and I'm aware of the physical and emotional toll that can have on marriages. However, for these past 3 years, my wife and I have had very little intimacy, and we've been trying very hard to work on that aspect of our relationship. This past year has been the most difficult and by far the darkest year in our marriage. We didn't talk very much. We essentially became roommates, co-parenting our kids under the same roof. It was very depressing and very demoralizing. It was to the point where we began contemplating divorce, and it became very dark and gloomy in the household because of that. We began seeking help with both individualized therapy and couples therapy, and it seems to have helped some. Little by little, we started to get along and started to have deeper conversations about what our marriage looks like and what we would love for it to look like. This is where it gets tough. As time passed, my wife started to tell me she no longer was in love with me, and that she only saw me as a best friend. That she only loved me in a very platonic way, and this was one of the main reasons she didn't have any desire for intimacy. This was very shocking to me, and quite frankly, I was devastated. I was angry and depressed, and I couldn't fathom the thought that I was no longer wanted or desired by the person I felt completely in love with. Things began to deteriorate again, and not long after, we were back to square one. I sat down with her one afternoon and had a heart-to-heart and began to ask questions about where the root of this problem lies, and her answer was, "I don't know, and that I have built up resentment towards you, but I don't know where it stems from." As you can imagine, this provides very little to no insight into how to approach this. I'm puzzled, I'm frustrated, and I do not know what to do at this point. Currently, we've arrived at a place where she says that she has zero libido and no desire for intimacy or connection. She says that all she wants is simply companionship, which basically means our co-parenting roommate dynamic. I asked her what I could possibly do or what is it about me that is so unattractive or undesirable, and her response is always, "I don't know." She stated that she does love me, but it's not the same. That she has been feeling disconnected for years and that our marriage just takes up too much work. Her focus is only the children for now, and that my co-parenting contributions are meaningful to her in our home. I'm at a loss, and I'm mainly venting about my frustration. It's tough to realize that the person you love has no feelings for you. I feel like at this point I'm only here to contribute financially and as a parent. I feel like what she means with companionship is that she's comfortable with the convenience of having a good father for our kids and my financial contribution to the household. In regard to intimacy, she basically told me that it's not something she's interested in or wants at this time. She mentioned that the only way to get to a point for any of that is to be intoxicated, which I believe is incredibly awful and very wrong. I told her I do not think forcing herself to be intimate by drinking or smoking is good, and I declined to be a part of that, which, to my surprise, upset her and made her more distant. We're both extremely honest and transparent. We've never cheated on each other, and we are always free to look through each other's phones, emails, and social media, and we hardly ever do. I asked her if there was someone else, and she declined. Honestly, I believe her. We then peacefully went through each other's things, and as expected, it was clean. We've always been very forward, even with the hard topics, so I don't smell nor feel any foul play or infidelity. Am I wrong for declining to only be intimate when she's intoxicated? I'm firm on my stance of not partaking in this, only when I'm high or drunk intimacy because it doesn't sit well with me. I do not know how to help our situation, and I'm starting to become a bit anxious and desperate. We're both fairly young and healthy individuals and good-looking. We both have good standing careers and are good parents. I'm just not sure how our lives could have driven us to this point. I'd love some outside perspective on this matter and some insight on how to address something like this. It feels so awful to be unwanted and undesired by my own spouse. I hate it. Update. I wanted to give you guys an update of how the therapy session with my wife went this week. Not sure if this is helpful or not, but I took many of the responses from my initial post and put together some things I wanted to discuss with our couples therapist to help us navigate some of the core issues that may be affecting this situation. One of the main things that is the buzzword of this has been the term resentment, and it has been really eating me up inside, knowing my wife keeps telling me she doesn't know why she's resentful or doesn't know why this is affecting her mentally. I brought this up with our therapist once again and resurfaced the conversation about being married for so long and being together since we were 14 years old. Our long history of growing up and having children when she was 19 years old significantly changed the trajectory of our lives. We experienced severe poverty and many hardships in the process, and we essentially had zero social life for the past 10 years because we were so busy raising babies. She followed up with tons of questions, mostly directed at my wife, about her feelings towards this, and 90% of the responses were very our kids focused. It definitely felt like she was afraid of saying, yes, it sucked because she would feel guilt or shame because it would imply she regrets the kids. I mentioned this in the session, and the therapist encouraged her to look at this outside of the lens of being a mother and to try to view it a bit more selfishly and individually, and it was very eye-opening. My wife mentioned that she was very frustrated with the fact that we did miss out on many things in life. She also was very clear in saying, I do not think I missed out on other partners or dating or partying, but I certainly lost all my friends. This was huge because one of the big pieces that has caused strain in our lives is how isolated we've been. I followed up by reminding her that it's important to have good friends and to make time for herself and her friendships. For the past 3 years, we've had multiple conversations about friends and how it is important to have them in life, especially when you have similar peers that can help in many areas of life that perhaps we have no experience navigating and even simply for enjoyment. It has always been something my wife avoids, even though she's always been someone who needs those external stimuli. The main reason for her not investing in friends or even herself has always been the kids. Like I mentioned earlier in this post, 90% of the answers have to relate to the kids to some degree. At this point in our session, I started to feel like there was a common denominator in most of the frustrations and problems she was experiencing. So I simply asked her, "Do you think you may be upset at me because I'm responsible for these kids in the sense that I got you pregnant so young?" I wasn't ready, but she said that she was upset at me for that. She also followed up with the fact that she knows that's unreasonable, because it takes two to tango. I did feel like it was progress because it kind of gave us something to work on and help alleviate some of these burdens, so we agreed to invest more time in nurturing good friendships both together and individually. Towards the end of the session, we began to discuss what actionable items we would take from this session. At this point, it was still all very ambiguous and blurry as to what the outcomes were. I was very direct and very forward in asking my wife what her plan is moving forward. I had already decided prior to the session that should my wife say the same thing about being a co-parenting roommate, that I would take the 180 approach. She started basically saying the same thing, that she doesn't have any desire to be intimate with me as of now, and that she loves me immensely, and she feels bad for not being there for me. I also brought up other life events that may cause resentment, and really we ended up not getting anywhere else as far as the root for resentment, which was discouraging. I then basically expressed to my wife that I would not be okay with that arrangement. I told her that I've really done everything I can, and that this issue really has reached a point where it has nothing to do with me or requires me to do anything that I'm currently not doing. I was very direct, saying that I will not be accepting this dynamic, and that I need to be with someone who is actively involved in our marriage, works towards resolutions, and is very interested in maintaining an active intimacy. I expressed how I am not going to be a convenience, and that there was more to life than being roommates and co-parents. I made sure she knows I love her dearly and that I do want this to work for the better. I also told her that I'm fully committed to this marriage so long as she is as well, and that is, she wasn't. It's okay. However, I will not be a part of something where these efforts are not reciprocated. I told her I have no plans of leaving, and I do not want a divorce. However, I made it clear that if this dynamic continues, divorce will be the only outcome. Of course, tears were involved, and it was a very bleak and sad ending to the session. Still nothing was said, and I walked out very discouraged and very determined to start working on the 180 as soon as we left the room. It's painful and very difficult because much of the 180 requires you to be very short, cold, and transactional. The saddest part is realizing this dynamic is already very cold and transactional. Here is where it gets very interesting. I started working on implementing many of the 180 recommendations that same day. I mentioned to my wife that, hey, things are going to be a bit different moving forward. I'm going to honor her roommate co-parent dynamic without reproach, and that it should be no mistake that I am not happy here and I am never going to be okay with it. But I am done working on it if she wasn't going to work on it. She agreed and went to bed. I started to build distance and started to basically focus on myself. Very short and transactional. She asked for help on some of her personal things, which I declined, and it really shocked her. She was upset, saying I was being petulant. I explained to her that she is now fully in charge of her own life and her own issues. We didn't talk all day, and we only spoke when necessary. Few days I keep this going, and she's very visibly upset and stressed. I typically react to that with gestures of help or nurturing, but I didn't this time. That night she was crying, telling me she's stressed, and she thinks something is wrong with me because I'm indifferent. I simply listened. Then I told her that this is the dynamic she proposed, and that I'm simply taking care of myself and focusing on myself. I'm not going to lie, it has been very hard to be cold and distant because, as I mentioned before, I love her and I wish I could hold her and love on her. However, I know this is somewhat manipulative in a way just to get her way and still keep me in the friend zone. So, I've been staying on the course. We're now going on a week of this 180, and let's just say, there have been many changes on her side. I think she is starting to realize there is more to me than just friends and co-parenting. I sent her a text a few days ago essentially itemizing bills and separating the financial responsibilities 50-50, and she lost her calm. She basically told me it was out of left field, to which I responded, hey, friends go in 50-50, and as your friend, I expect nothing less. This was very eye-opening because it gave me a glimpse of how I'm really taken for granted and how her level of comfort and convenience at my expense is really overlooked. I pushed through anyways and basically told her that this is the new dynamic she asked for and that it's still a bargain, because she would have to be 100% if she was on her own. I'll wrap up with this. While the 180 approach has been working in many different areas, I am still very sad about the overall situation. There have been many eye-opening statements being made and realizations that have not been pleasant to encounter. It has also sparked new energy and new efforts on her side as well. She's definitely seeking to talk to me more often, and while it's hard to turn down, I hope if things improve, this continues to happen. I've also noticed that she's making more time for herself aside from being a mom, which is huge because she pretty much neglected herself for years. I'm very pleased seeing her be more herself. My hope is that, as we work on ourselves, the marriage improves. There really is no telling at this point where this will go. We are very cordial and amicable even to this day, and that's a very good sign. Boundaries are set and expectations are very clear, and I feel that no matter the outcome, I will be at peace with everything that has been done. We're still going to continue the couples therapy until we either rekindle our marriage or end up in divorce. I feel like having this non-biased third party really helps as a witness and as a guide through this. No matter what, I will always love my wife. However, I will not participate in an intimacy-less marriage because we both deserve better. Relevant comments. A user comments. So, I'm going to assume that your wife has a lucrative job and you are both going 50-50 on childcare, as you both work and share children. Because otherwise this approach is just plain financially abusive. Assuming that is the case and you aren't a total POS, I'm actually interested in how this works out for you. I feel like I'm in an unstated, similar situation. We both work and have blended finances, but we don't go to bed together or eat together, have barely any intimacy, and spend maybe 8 hours a week together, just the three of us, him, me, and the toddler. Even less, just the two of us, maybe 3 hours a week. Otherwise, he is on his game or out playing sports, watching YouTube, or whatever else he does. It barely feels like a friend situation, let alone a marriage. I'm curious how she handles it, as the spouse that presumably was pulling away first. I hope you keep us updated. OOP replies. Yes, we both have degrees and good careers, and while I make significantly more money, her salary is very proficient and above average. The 50-year-old was not to cripple nor hurt her financially, but mostly to send a message on what a roommate dynamic looks like in the real world. I really dislike how people immediately jump to conclusions about the finances as a way of manipulating her. It's not the case at all. Plenty of money left over after bills. However, 50-50 means she has less whatever money and the understanding that roommates share everything equally. Prior to this 180 approach, we did everything together and with our kids. We always saw ourselves as a unit that did things together, both alone and with the kids too. That's changed now, where I'm choosing to focus on more independent types of pastimes and focus. That is what has sparked her reaction and realization of there's more than just roommates here. Another user comments. How does one dump half of the household expenses on the other person if they share a bank account? Or are your finances kept separately? Just curious how this would work if applied to my life. OOP replies. Excellent question. We shared everything. The proposed 50-50 was suggesting we place the necessary amount to pay bills in the same account, and any leftover money can be deposited in a new account. I think this is why she was very upset. She felt a huge loss of control knowing she wouldn't be able to monitor my finances. Also, she felt a huge loss in her leftover money with this arrangement and saw that I would keep significantly more of my own. This is still being worked out because I think she is calling my bluff here, but my plan is to notify her next week as I modify my direct deposit and open a new account. It will definitely be more real there. To be clear, yes, she will have less leftover money after responsibilities, and it's still enough to live on. For reference, assume I make $3,000 a month, she makes $1,000 a month. Responsibilities are $1,000 a month, so she'd contribute $500 and I would contribute $500, where before she would contribute only $250. This is the last comment I'll add regarding money and finances. She's fine, and she's not hurting, I promise. Another user asked, what if she leaves for another man? Interesting. She has no shortage of men hitting on her, and we're by no means jealous people. So I've witnessed this multiple times, and her reactions are somewhat indifferent. I will say if another man for her was the answer, she'd tell me, or she'd have some inkling maybe. There's no telling, but I think the problem is deeper than superficial attention from a different person. And, you might be right. And if this is the case, so be it. However, I'll live with peace knowing I left no stone unturned. I know I would be disappointed and saddened if she did leave for another man who would accept the bare minimum, but I'd also feel peace knowing it's not all my fault. I know sadness and depressing will creep, but we'll both overcome. If this does happen, at least there will be clear reasons and clarity as to why it did. Also, I know for a fact that she wouldn't cheat. We're both very blunt, open, and transparent. She would definitely tell me that she wants to step out of our marriage before it actually happens. As would I. We owe ourselves this respect for each other, and we actively practice it. Update. I debated for a long time on whether to submit an update on this matter. A few significant changes have taken place, and I felt it would be good to not only share with you but also to allow myself to process all of this in a uniform way. We're now almost 9 weeks into the 180 method I mentioned I was starting, and it started to render some positive reactions from my wife. I explained in the previous posts that she started to notice things that she previously took for granted, started to ask more about my whereabouts, and also started to notice I would go out with the kids more often without her, and she started to invite herself, which I didn't decline. So much has changed, and it has changed for what seems to be for the better. This past Memorial Day weekend, my wife asked me if I wanted to go out for coffee because she wanted to talk to me about something. This was huge, because I can't recall when the last time my wife asked to talk to me about something important. I must admit, I was very nervous and worried about what this could be about, and my mind was racing with the plethora of scenarios of what it could possibly be. Of course I agreed, and we took some time away from the kids to have this conversation at a local coffee shop. The talk was very constructive in nature. There was a ton of insightful information about herself that helped me further understand where she is in life, both emotionally and mentally. We summarized what the core issues we are encountering are, and she asked me for help. This is new, and I cannot tell you how excited I was hearing something so sincere coming from my wife, who for the last 2+ years has been absent. So, after she was through sharing all her thoughts, I proposed a plan that I felt was right for us. This is something that I had been thinking about these last few weeks, and I was planning on bringing this up in a few months if I noticed that things were not changing for the better. This date felt like the right place to share it since it goes hand in hand with what she talked about and also relates to the help she was asking me for. I started by first acknowledging her feelings and her concerns. I told her they are valid and how she feels is personal to her, and that I care that she feels this way, because I don't like the thought of her being sad or depressed. I also told her that my goal still is, and will always be, for us to reconcile, and be the happily ever after we vowed to be for each other, and that my love for her is as strong, if not stronger, as it was the day we said, I do. I continued the conversation by telling her how I felt about the whole situation, and how it affects me every day. I also clarified some things that she mentioned she was feeling because I have been very distant and monotone lately. I explained to her that I was very much trying to protect my feelings and emotions from the rejection and neglect, and that it wasn't personal. It was simply me safeguarding myself because I cannot control her. I can only control myself. This was a perfect segue to the core of this approach, which is focused on self-accountability. I told her that for the longest time I was always working hard to make her happy and do things that I knew she enjoyed or wanted. However, I was always met with rejection and disappointment, which caused a load of stress on me. I explained to her that I had to make a change for myself. After all, I can only control myself and make the changes that I want for myself. I mentioned how I was starting to implement new habits and routines that help edify me all while still executing all of our shared responsibilities, including parenting, finances, and daily living activities. I explained that the goal is to continue to improve myself both as a husband and father, learn more, and be healthier. She was very receptive to this. She told me that she sees what I'm doing and that she is proud of the changes she has seen. She also told me how she's starting to realize that she feels left behind, and that much of the things that have affected her negatively are her own fault. Toward the end of the conversation, which was about 3 hours, there was a very high spirit of reconciliation in the room. I told her that my goal is to ultimately make this work. However, I was very clear that I was not going to live under the current circumstances. I told her that my heart wants her to be happy, even if it means elsewhere, and that I also deserve to be happy myself. I also explained that I do not want our children to grow up thinking this was okay or normal, because they deserve better as well. She told me she doesn't either. She told me she doesn't know what to do, to which I replied, let's set some clear goals. However, the goals will be for ourselves, not for each other. So here is what we established. We are in charge of our own happiness. The key here is that she's not responsible for making me happy, and vice versa. We both need to seek out what that personal plan looks like individually. Also, we're both encouraged to include each other in taking those steps if we want, but it is not required. We are in control of our own individual lives and our own journey. This means we're both responsible for finding the resources necessary to grow, change, and heal. We can definitely help one another when help is requested. However, unsolicited advice or help will not be rendered. We are responsible for communicating. This ensures nothing is left unsaid. If it was never brought up or discussed, it never happened. We're not mind readers, and we need to take ownership when we fail to communicate. Make a list of needs and wants. This gives us both clear direction about meeting each other's needs. This also gives us a choice as to what we choose to do, compromise on, or decline to do. This list also will not serve as a checklist for accountability. We made it clear we would not be bringing this list up for the purpose of arguing, and it was up to the other person to use the list as a tool for growth, transparency, or clarification. We concluded that it was up to us to decide if we will be happy doing these things for ourselves because we care, not to simply check a box. This was very important in order to establish long-term habits and not short-term band-aids, because you cannot make someone change or do something they don't believe is important. Established a deadline. At the end of the conversation, we concluded by setting Memorial Day 2025 as a hard stop to evaluate our lives and our progress. We agreed we would do this with the clear understanding that we will independently decide if we are happy here. If we determine we aren't happy, we will be getting a divorce. We would also both assume full responsibility for what happened should we get divorced. For example, if needs were not met, it would mean my partner chose not to meet them. This places full responsibility on each other in all areas. The whole process requires that if needs were not met, the next question should be, did we do everything to address this issue? If yes, then we will be clear conscious of what transpired and know we left no stone unturned. If, however, we didn't do everything to address the issue, it will mean the issue was not important enough for you or didn't care to meet those needs. We established that the main motivator for change should be ourselves, and that if we did that, we would in turn begin to see beneficial changes towards each other. The goal is to ensure that everything we are doing for one another to meet each other's needs is being done because we want to do it for our spouse, not because someone asked. Instead, it was done because I know it makes her happy, and I love seeing them happy. I felt it was important to mention to her that we are no longer required to do anything for each other. It is now more of an I want to do these things for each other. Ultimately, I felt the conversation was very positive and productive. Many tears were shed and lots of hugging ensued. I know this doesn't mean or guarantee anything. However, this has never happened before, and I can honestly attribute it to the 180 method. I've decided I will conclude and will refrain from this method moving forward as the plan now has changed. I'm planning to devote myself entirely to not only myself and my growth but to also work on her needs and wants because I want her to be happy by my side. She said and agreed she would do the same for herself. We agreed we would help and build each other wherever we requested it, and that we would be approaching this as a team. As of today, some of the biggest changes I have noticed are her commitment to therapy and mental health. She is taking some antidepressants that are helping her. She is also more confident and in a far better mood more frequently. We have started to explore more ways of intimacy in multiple areas, such as physical touch and words of affirmation. Intimacy is starting to make an appearance, which is exciting. We've also started to work out together, which is great, and have lost weight, which is also very exciting. Overall, communication has improved, and I cannot wait to see where this leads. Wow, what a difficult and emotional situation. Reading this, I felt a deep sense of sadness and frustration. It's heartbreaking to see a marriage that started with so much love and connection fall into such a painful place. The way the husband has tried everything to reconnect, only to be met with his wife's indifference, must be incredibly disheartening. It's clear that he still deeply loves his wife and wants to make things work, but the constant rejection and lack of intimacy must make him feel so isolated. It's hard not to sympathize with him as he navigates this challenging chapter in his life.